The movies and television are filled with the creative monsters designed to frighten and entertain us all. But inside every home is something that can be far more frightening. It sits innocently, offering a pipeline of information that's become a portal to the world. It's the internet, one of the great inventions of our time. It can even work in reverse, enabling conversations among friends and strangers. And that last category, strangers, can challenge the most horrific tales imaginable. Hello, I'm Bill Curtis with another episode from the files of the Illinois State Police. As we open this file, the so-called chat rooms were relatively new. The user was young, too young to know the dark corners of reality, or even dream about the evil behind the nice-sounding voice on the other side of the screen. How could anything go wrong? We start with the director of the Illinois State Police, Brendan Kelly.
Thank you, Bill. It is my honor to be able to introduce a person who's had an incredible experience and use that traumatic experience to become a very powerful advocate for children and for children that have been victimized, that have survived, and that need law enforcement, that need all of us advocating for them to prevent child exploitation, to prevent internet crimes against children. And that's the focus of what we're talking about here today. So with that, let me introduce a very special person, Alicia Kozakiewicz. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for having this conversation. It is one that we absolutely need to have because every child and every family is at risk. And back when I was 13 years old, I would never think that something like this could happen to me. So jumping into my story and where it starts and how I got into the work that I have been in for the last 24 years is that when I was 13 years old, I became the first child who was groomed and lured from their home by an internet predator. I became the first case of online child abduction. I was groomed for a period of 9 months. And this was in a time where people certainly did not talk about internet safety. We did not have conversations like this. If we did, this likely would not have happened to me. My parents would have been informed. I would have known. But there were no red flags to look for because there was no knowledge. There was no education. There was nobody talking about this. And so when I was online, I was careful with the knowledge that I have. And there's that saying, what you don't know can't hurt you. And when I speak to kids in school, I tell them, and really any audience, like that's totally garbage. Because if you don't know it's dangerous, you can't protect yourself from it. And I certainly didn't. So I was in a chat room, and this was back in 2001, 2002, when the internet was very different than it is today. And somebody messaged me who I thought was a boy around my own age, and he immediately began to groom me. And grooming is really very simple. It's just pretending to be a child's friend and filling in the gaps of their insecurities and making them feel like this is the person that they can trust. This is the person that knows the real them. And I was a child who felt very loved. My family wasn't perfect, but there were no really issues at home. There wasn't anything like that, but I was still lonely, as all children are. And I was insecure, as so many children are. And like I said, somebody messaged me who I thought was a boy around my own age, started up a conversation, and I didn't know that it could be dangerous. He talked to me for about 9 months, and grooming is really like brainwashing. And I really want the audience and the listeners to hear this because it's easy to read a case and go, oh, my child would never do that. My child knows better. My child's a good kid. They get good grades. They've never gotten in trouble. They're good on their phone. They're honest with me. We have a good relationship. That isn't enough. It isn't enough. Predators are so good at what they do, and they can change the very essence, the very substance, the very makeup of a child and get them to do things that they would never do otherwise. Case in point, on New Year's Day 2002, I walked outside to meet this person who I thought was my friend, and I was a child who was terrified of the cold, or not terrified of the cold, hated the cold, terrified of the dark, and never went outside alone after dark. Yet on this night, I walked out of my front door into the coldest, darkest, iciest night that you can imagine. And in Illinois, we know what cold is, for sure, what cold is there. I walked outside and I walked up the street just about a block or so, and this little voice spoke up, my intuition. And I tell my audiences, please pay attention to that because mine spoke up too late. Next thing I knew, I was in a car. This man kidnapped me, and he took me from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I lived at the time, to Virginia, where he held me captive in his basement dungeon, where I suffered horrendous abuse and was raped and beaten and tortured. He had what the media called a basement dungeon, and in reality, that's exactly what it was. It was a room to torture somebody. Over 4 days, I suffered horrendous abuse. He didn't feed me. He broke my nose in one of the struggles. People often asked me, did you think that you were going to die? And it wasn't an if, it was a when. And miraculously, I was rescued. And when I say a miracle, I really mean that. I was rescued because he had live streamed what he was doing to me to other people online in the very early days of live streaming. And one of the viewers who was watching this recognized me from the National Center for Missing Exploited Children poster that had been sent out. So please always look at those. But noticed me from that and recognized the little girl in this horrendous video and contacted law enforcement, and it led to my rescue. I got a second chance at life. I'm so incredibly lucky, and that's why I've dedicated my life to speaking out, to sharing my story, and to educating the public and the world about how dangerous the internet can be, because I understand how easily this can happen. And speaking in schools, I can tell you that the problem has only gotten worse. There may be more information out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that kids are safer because the predators have only gotten better and there's only more access to children.
Alicia, how was someone able to identify you and then report to law enforcement? Can you explain that again?
Absolutely. So he had live streamed, much like you do when you go onto Instagram Live or go live on TikTok and you are recording what is happening in front of you and it's live. And he had been abusing me on this live stream. There was an audience who was watching it, and one of the people who had tuned into this, not to sound so casual about it, but tuned into this, contacted law enforcement because he had recognized me from the missing poster, and he knew that this man was going to kill me. So he ran out to actually a payphone at the time, to tell you the time that this was in, and contacted the FBI and had very little information, but he did have one of the screen names the perpetrator used, and they were able to use that to track down his IP address, which led to the house where I was being held captive.
Can you tell me about that a little bit more? Just how, having experienced that, what brought you from that point, the day you were rescued, to becoming such a well-spoken and very influential advocate for this issue?
After this happened, I realized that there was no internet safety education being taught anywhere. There were no PSAs, no seminars. There were no stories like mine. Like I said, I was the first case that was high profile. So there was no education out there. And people were talking about my case afterwards. And there was quite a lot of victim blaming, and nobody was having the right conversation. And all I wanted to do was protect, quite honestly, my peers. I felt that I'd been given this second chance at life, and I just wanted to help, and that I'd been given this gift. And I don't mean what happened to me as a gift by any means, but that gift of a second chance. And I wanted to protect other children. So when I was 14 years old, I started to share my story, jumping into it without really thinking it through, because I wanted to help. I wanted to help. And my very first presentation, I remember completely freezing and just really crying and speaking from the heart. And I remember thinking, oh, I failed these kids. I'm not meant to do this. I have this squeaky little voice and I'm this little shy girl. What could I ever do to make a difference? And I opened my eyes because I was just so down at the time. And all these kids were surrounding me and telling me how they were going to do this now and that the story really impacted them. And over the years, I've had so many success stories of truly making a difference. And my goal has always been to save one child. If I could save one child, then it's entirely worth it. And I know that I have done that. I receive messages from the kids that I speak at in schools all the time. And from parents, one of my favorite from parents is that my daughter, she's 13, she really wanted an iPhone, and she's been pestering me about it for her birthday, for Christmas, for all the holidays. Put it in my Easter basket, put it in my Christmas stocking. And she had come to my presentation at a school, and the little girl went home and said, Mom, no, I'm not ready for it. This is way too dangerous. You and I need to sit down together and we need to make a plan to keep me and my little sister safe. This is not okay right now. And I think that's such a huge impact right there, but also stories where children have come forward. I get so many disclosures after a presentation. I actually require to have a counselor and a law enforcement officer in the room because I need to get them to somebody immediately. It can't be a when you're ready or come back after class. These kids need help immediately. And there was a girl just recently who messaged me on Instagram again yesterday and thanked me for helping to save her life. And I don't say that because I'm amazing or great. I'm saying that because kids really need help and they need somebody to listen. Thankfully, I listened and law enforcement in the room listened, but she was being cyber stalked in a very clear, awful way. But it was tracked down to an adult in Florida who had 48 other victims. And that was the first time she had spoken up and shared that, and she felt the courage to do it that day.
It seems like you're coming across in your work so many other people that have experienced things similar to you, maybe not as horrible, or maybe stories where they didn't survive. And you're meeting parents and family and survivors that have experienced this and endured just something that's absolutely, that we all know is just extremely gut-wrenching and really hard on the soul. But it is amazing how you speak about it and how you speak about it with such positivity in a way that puts people at ease and lets them know that they need to be wary of this threat that's out there. If they're a parent, they need to be looking at this. If you are a child, a young person who's online, and we all are, every single person is, that the way you speak about it makes it okay to talk about it and think about it and acknowledge it, and then be able to do something about it. I think what's concerning for all of us as we sit around this table and as we're joined by law enforcement, as we're joined by the top law enforcement official in this state, our attorney general, is how much work there really is to do, how much it's not going the right direction yet. There's a lot of people like you doing good work, but do you feel like we just have so much work to do? I'm sure you do.
Absolutely. The dangers are, like I said, awareness is being raised, but the dangers are only growing with access to AI and things like sextortion. Predators just have so many avenues to harm children now where they don't even have to have a hands-on offense. And that's something that I'm seeing so much is that predators have realized that they can have dozens or maybe even hundreds of victims without ever feeling like they're really risking, and they can have that many victims at the same time. And there's so much we can do. I really appreciate you had said that I was positive because I really feel and I know that there is so much hope out there that we can really protect our children and our families. Yes, there's so many dangers, and it's so much more dangerous than when I was a child. But there are definite ways that we can work to protect. This is something that we can certainly not push under the rug or say, my kid's a good kid. There's so much we have to do. And I wanted to mention one of the things that is really important is certainly getting funding to law enforcement groups that investigate these sort of crimes, like the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. One of the ways that I've helped to do that is through my namesake legislation, Alicia's Law, which has not yet passed in Illinois. So let's get on that. I work closely with the officers and the agents, and I have been in conferences where they have truly held each other and cried because they don't have the resources, they don't have the capabilities. And it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that they are drowning in cyber tips and tips about child sexual exploitation and victimization, that there's just not enough officers, there's not enough technology, there's not enough resources, there's just not enough. And the predators have too much. So we have to make law enforcement have the ability to have enough so that they can go after the people who do this to harm our children.
Well, on that note, let's talk about law enforcement. We are certainly fully engaged in the fight here in the state of Illinois, and in part by inspiration from people like you, Alicia. At the top, setting that tone, not just here at the Illinois State Police, but for the entire state, is our Attorney General. Since I've been working with him over many years, this has been a priority for him and for his team. So with that, let me introduce the Attorney General of the state of Illinois, Kwame Raoul.
Thank you, Director Kelly. And I also want to thank Alicia for sharing her story here today, for utilizing your experience to do outreach to others. And make them aware of the risks that are out there. As Attorney General, I get to head up the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, one of 61 nationally in 101 of the 102 counties in the state of Illinois. It's dedicated to investigating and prosecuting online child exploitation. And the one thing about having a task force, it's all about teamwork. It's about a collaboration with Director Kelly and the state police and over 200 local agencies, as well as partnership with federal law enforcement. It's a multidisciplinary team of intelligence, investigations, digital forensics, and prosecutions of crimes that have been investigated. And as you highlighted, Alicia, awareness in the interest of prevention. We're happy to have had the collaboration with the state police and other local law enforcement agencies. And I've attended numerous trainings of law enforcement partners that we get the opportunity to conduct. And I've seen the emotion that you talk about, Alicia, and the dedication of these law enforcement officers that have to do this day in, day out.
Attorney General, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in Illinois? What are the challenges that are, some good examples and some successes that you've had through your office confronting this incredibly complex and vast issue?
We get notified through cyber tips that come through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And in 2024, there were over 15,000 cyber tips that our investigators triaged. And that was an 11.6% increase from the number reported in 2023. In terms of the trend, what that increase was mostly represented or all represented by was an increase in online enticement. The possession, distribution, and manufacturing of child sexual abuse materials make up the majority of those cyber tips. So in 2023, it made up 93% of the cyber tips. In 2024, it made up 79% of the cyber tips, not because the number of CSAM reports decreased, but it was the increase in the number of online enticement cases that were reported. So it's sextortion that Alicia spoke about earlier. That increase in actual enticement is one of the trends we're seeing. The other challenge, and it's sort of related, is the evolution of artificial intelligence and its use in that enticement. And so with regards to successes, some of the successes we try to achieve, we have to do legislatively, because prior to recent years, we didn't see the challenge with AI-generated child pornography that can't be distinguished by the human eye from actual child pornography. Some of the struggles we had convincing certain members of the legislature is the argument that, well, it's not a real child. Except while we were trying to get the legislature, and the legislature did give us the tools to deal with this, while we were making the argument for them to take this on, in Wisconsin, nearby in Wisconsin, a man was arrested by the FBI who was using AI-generated child pornography in his enticement efforts with minors. So we were able to use that arrest to argue to the legislature that this was a very much needed tool.
Well, I know that you have an amazing team in the Attorney General's office. I know, like you, Attorney General, you have a lot of great people. I have a lot of great people behind me at the Illinois State Police, making us look good, making us look like effective leaders of an incredible law enforcement team, but really do amazing work. And I know that from your office today, we have Chris Feller, who is from the Internet Crimes Against Children program. She's the program manager with the Illinois Attorney General's office. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce her from the Illinois Attorney General's office. And thank you, Attorney General, for your leadership on this issue. So Chris.
Good morning, and thank you. And Alicia, thank you for your story. It's very inspiring. It's timely. As the Attorney General mentioned, the increase in online enticement reports that we received between 2023 and 2024, those are a direct result, one, of an increase of online sextortion cases, but also the resource of in-app reporting. Many social media companies have started to add that function within apps And so again, with that, we're seeing that kids are more likely, they'll start communication with an individual they might not know. But once they get that moment of, maybe this has gone too far. Maybe I've received an image or video, they're asking for something. We're seeing that kids are making those reports. So with that, we're having that increase in reports, which really goes into, parenting. The kids are comfortable making those online reports. However, what we need conversations with parents, ongoing conversations where parents are engaging with their children about their online activity.
What are the resources that are out there? How does this usually play out from the Attorney General's office perspective? What is it the way that you guys are engaging on this issue?
The Attorney General's office, as those reports are coming in, he mentioned over 15,000 reports that the Attorney General's office received last year. First, there's a triage of those by our Intel unit. And so our Intel unit is looking to determine, are these cases actionable? If so, given the amount of leakage that an offender or a child may have on the internet, we're taking those, doing open source, and then sending them out to one of our affiliates. We have set up our Intel unit so that each analyst covers specific investigative zones that have been outlined by the Illinois State Police. That's the way our law enforcement operate throughout the state, and it allows them to gain solid relationships with them and to develop and track those trends that might be occurring within those jurisdictions. Most of our reports, we're relying heavily on our law enforcement affiliates, but then also with state police and attorney general investigators as well.
What can people know in terms of being able to figure out what is safe online? I mean, it is such a vast area of information that we can all access the collective human knowledge at our fingertips, on our cell phones, on personal devices, on computers, and everyone is on there. And there's very few human beings on the planet that aren't engaged online somehow. And with that comes just all types of activity that it's hard to decipher what is just fun, safe activity, things people are using for buying things online, for selling things, for just engaging in different communities and chat rooms about all kinds of perfectly appropriate topics. But how do people, parents and children distinguish between what's safe and what is clearly a red flag?
You're absolutely correct in mentioning how connected our society is, especially youth. We know that by age 11, 50% of kids have access to a smartphone. And by age 13, 95% of teens have a smartphone. So first and foremost, parents need to determine the correct age to introduce technology and then determine what apps or games they are comfortable with learning alongside their child. And different features that we are seeing now, there could be hidden areas within apps that children could set up passwords for. There's end-to-end encryption that's occurring within apps. And when that end encryption occurs, we're not seeing it. Law enforcement isn't being alerted to it. Parents aren't being alerted to it. So the ability for messages to disappear and or images of videos. The parents, what we first and foremost need to determine is the correct age to introduce that technology.
What really is that age, though? How do you decide as a parent when we all use technology to just kind of keep track of our kids? In some ways, it can enhance safety, because at least we know where they are. I know when I was a kid, we could be 3 towns over on our bikes or driving around in our cars when we were teenagers, and our parents had no idea where we are. But I have a much better idea where my kids are, frankly, because of cell phones and that technology. But it's that same technology that connects them to what can be a very dangerous world. So how do you decide when it's right to give a kid access to this type of technology that can protect them, but also be very dangerous for them?
As a parent, what we're going to need to look at is all of the different features within those devices. Definitely, we want to be connected. And I look at some family members and individuals I know, they're starting with a basic flip phone, right? And that's for communication. That's for safety issues. We know that kids are sometimes home alone in the evenings. And yes, if they have an emergency, if they need to get a hold of someone, they need a device. But how powerful does that device need to be? We think about children when they get access to a car, to a vehicle. They're taking a quarter of class where they're in a classroom reading from a book, and then they have time behind the wheel. With these smartphones and devices, it's easy to go in, purchase it, and we're giving them access. They'll travel further online and meet more people in more states and countries than they ever will just driving that vehicle. Again, with a parent, it's going to be based upon the maturity of that child. But at the same time, as a parent, we have to realize kids are still growing up. The brain is not fully developed until we're about 25, that executive functioning. So again, kids oftentimes, they're looking for immediate gratification, instant replies. And again, that's where we as parents need to insert ourselves, because when these situations come up, whether it's enticement, whether it's sextortion, right? Oftentimes the amygdala part of the brain is going to take over for a child, and they're going to go into that fight or flight, and they'll make decisions that we wouldn't want them to make. But again, kids don't want to disappoint their parents, their caregivers. And so that's why we need to make sure that if we introduce these, that we are having ongoing conversations, that we're bringing up these issues, that we're talking to them about Alicia's story, asking them if they're familiar with kids who maybe have had similar experiences, if individuals have reached out to them online and asked to communicate with them. Have people asked for images or videos or shown them nude images or videos? We know that that's a tactic that's used to desensitize youth. So again, it's that ongoing conversation, but also as parents, sometimes we're really good at saying the don'ts. Don't do this. I expect this. We need to make sure that conversation is open so that when they do make a mistake, that they will come to us. And I think that's very important in the enticement and in the sextortion cases.
Alicia, I'm sure you're in many environments where you're talking about your story and you're trying to educate people. I'm sure you're doing it in schools, community groups, all types of settings. I'm sure parents are asking you, how do I know what's too early to give my kid access to digital devices or to be able to do things online? Maybe that's not the right question of what the right age is, but what are the right things to do when using devices online or when communicating to people in a digital way through their phones or on a computer at certain ages? How do you set a right framework when you're giving advice to parents? And obviously they are sure as hell going to listen to you because of what you've been through. What do you say to them when they sometimes might have that knee-jerk reaction? Okay, we're never having a phone ever, until you're 21. We're not going to give you an iPhone. We know that's not real. And we know that's not doable. But what is doable? What kind of advice do you give them, Alicia?
Yeah, so I speak to parents quite often. I try to have a parent presentation after my student presentation because I want the kids to go home and to address it with their parents, and so often they do. But it is something that I hear quite frequently is, I'm never going to give my kid a device, or what age should I give them their first device? And we have all seen the child on the iPad at dinner or in a line at Disney World, which I saw recently, who is far too young to have access to that device. So we see children who are very young on devices, and parents will turn to devices now for safety reasons. They will feel that then their child is able to reach them. They're able to reach their child. They can turn on location services, know where their child is. And that is true. So it comes down to the question of how young should I have my child have a device? And the thing is, even if they don't have their own device, they're using their parents' device at an incredibly young age. I separate my presentation into different grades because it's a different conversation for each grade, really. So it's really important to do that. And I recently got some pushback with I don't know if you should talk to our fifth graders. They're far too young to hear this. You're going to scare them. They probably don't have devices. But just recently, I spoke in a school, and a parent had told me whose daughter was in fourth grade that she had given her daughter just a little bit of time to play on the phone, to go on a game for 15 minutes. And within 15 minutes, the child had somehow come across a predator. The predator tricked the little girl into sending an inappropriate photo. And the predator then said, if you don't send me more images, I'm going to kill your mother. And thankfully, because she was 9 years old, she immediately went to her mom. But so many kids don't. So many kids are afraid, and predators know that we are not necessarily educating children who are younger. So my advice to parents is that you have to educate your children before they get on a device. This isn't okay, let's try to do this retroactively. I understand if you have a 16-year-old today and you need to have this conversation, please do. But if you have a young child, have the conversation in an age-appropriate way. And I think a great way to start that is, hey, this device can be really fun. What do you like to do on it? What do you want to do with it? Have these kind of conversations, but then just flat out ask, what dangers do you think could happen? And you may get everything from I could get kidnapped to I could get hacked to I could get cyberbullied to I don't know. I think it's really safe. So then you know where to start with your child's knowledge base so that you can have a conversation that educates them and doesn't just scare them.
Well, I think if any of us that have kids, when they're little, you're telling them about the real world in the appropriate way. Don't run out in the middle of the street. You're going to get hit by a car. And that's when they're little. And when they get to be 14, 15, 16, well, when you're at a party, be very careful about, what you're drinking or what people may put in your drinks or being able to resist peer pressure. And then even when they're of adult age, you're still worried about what it is they may be doing, but you talk about it in the right context. And I think obviously what you're saying, Alicia, and I think what Chris is saying also is that we have to talk to our kids about everything they're doing online, even from the youngest age, and ratchet it up according to the risks that they may be engaged with at that age. So it's just a part of parenting in the 21st century. It has to be very much a part of what we're doing every day. Now, you mentioned, Alicia, repeatedly that these are predators, and they are predators. This is a genuine, serious, very dangerous threat, not just to someone's psychological well-being, not just for the risk of blackmail or sextortion or embarrassment or cyberbullying that can cause very serious mental health issues, but as you clearly went through, Alicia, direct threat to your safety and your well-being and your life. It is a matter of life and death. And that's why I think we have to take this so seriously from a law enforcement perspective, and why the Illinois State Police have put so much effort in the recent years to building out our capacity to be very engaged in the Internet Crimes Against Children task force and the overall model that we have here in the state of Illinois. And it's really a large part of what the Division of Criminal Investigation within the Illinois State Police has taken on over the past few years as we've tried to prioritize what are the most important threats to public safety that we as a large statewide law enforcement agency with outstanding special agents and some pretty sophisticated investigative capability, what do we prioritize when we're looking at drug trafficking, gun trafficking, violence? So many demands on law enforcement. Clearly, it has been important to us and continues to be important to us to be able to use all the resources we have as an agency to focus on Internet crimes against children. And how that plays out every day within our investigative zones and within the investigative capabilities and operations on a daily basis of the Illinois State Police. I have here to talk about that is Joshua here. He's acting Master Sergeant with the Illinois State Police Division of Criminal Investigation. And Master Sergeant, if you would explain and kind of educate people, how is the division working together with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force? What's the daily work that you all are doing that's just so outstanding in terms of getting results and investigating and being able to arrest, as Alicia rightly described, these predators?
Well, Alicia, first and foremost, thank you very much for sharing your story. It humanizes it to all of the people that you give that presentation to, more so than what anybody in my shoes can ever do in a classroom setting or in an auditorium. So just thank you so much. And thank you, Director Kelly, for the opportunity to represent the work the men and women of our department and other departments do as it relates to Internet crimes against children. I have to echo first something that the Attorney General himself said. The only reason why the Illinois State Police has been as successful as they have been is the teamwork aspect that encompasses so much of the Internet crimes against children. And it really starts with, the amount of training and education that goes into putting somebody into a position where they can successfully investigate and lead to a successful prosecution of these cases. We're given so much training by both the Illinois State Police and the Attorney General's office to accomplish so much. Locally, in the area that I work with, we work within a cohesive unit that encompasses up to 20 investigators from outside agencies that I work in. And through that, we're able to accomplish so much more than some of the typical ICAC investigators able to do. Really, in the last 7 years that I've been involved in ICAC, these cyber tips that we get from NECMEC and we investigate, they've led us so many different places. What starts here doesn't always end here, and we've been able to work these investigations where we've located other victims, we've located other family members. It's just tremendous opportunity for these cases to go further than just the cyber tip themselves, and it's through part of the tremendous amount of work that these agents, detectives, inspectors do throughout the state.
What are some of the examples that you come across as a career professional investigator in the Illinois State Police when you're trying to investigate a case where a child is a victim, a teen is a victim? It can be very embarrassing, obviously, for a child, a teenager who at that age is obviously most likely to be pretty insecure and kind of not completely formed human yet. As you said, Chris, our brains don't stop developing till we're 25. I know that there's a lot of insecurities that kids have and a lot of incomplete skills in terms of judgment, and they can find themselves in these circumstances and how they react to someone who may be trying to help them, but it's a very difficult situation to be able to be honest about what may have happened because people are embarrassed and they have shame that they're even in this circumstance. How do you as a professional, officer with the Illinois State Police, how have you guys worked through those challenges? I know you're really damn good at it, but how do you do it?
It starts with the relationship they have at home. It always starts there. Typically, if we have a victim who has been a subject of child pornography or an internet crimes against children, a solicitation, any sort of case like this, if they feel safe to go to their parents, to a school official, to a therapist, whatever it is, typically we'll take that case, sit down with them. We have professionals in place to help us do interviews. It's a great way to start a case, even though it's a terrible case to have to take.
Explain that, what the Child Advocacy Center is and then how the forensic interviewers go when you're talking to a child.
They're just wonderful. They have a way of connecting with these potential victims in a way that I cannot. And it's not through lack of trying, it's just their purpose, and they're so much better at it. They allow for a safe space, they allow for a safe conversation, and they allow for a safe transfer of information. However, we do take cases where I remember many of them where it'll just be a child calling, or rather be the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. It gets funded to me, or rather it be a walk-in, literally to one of our many zone offices, where it's a sit-down conversation with a child that was online, saw what they thought were an attractive male or female, sent an image that was inappropriate, and now they're being sextorted over the internet. We take them so many different ways. There's no routine way we take any of these cases.
I obviously don't necessarily want to in any way share information that gives the predators that are out there some sense or an advantage that they could have to hide their activity from law enforcement. I don't want to tip our hand to the bad guys, but I also want them to know that we're watching, that law enforcement does have some pretty incredible capabilities in this fight, and that might deter them from doing this type of terrible predatory activity. Explain to me a little bit about the technical capabilities, how some of these cases are reported through the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, how that information is gleaned from the notice and the warning system that we have online. Tell me a little bit about the technology that's behind this and this sort of amazing system that we have nationwide and globally.
Sure. Multiple ways in which we get a case. The easiest way, literally, is if a child is online and they share something inappropriate and they report it, it goes to NCMEC, National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. They can come in and report that. We can start a case, and we can go down the rabbit hole of this user's name and trying to find an IP address and finding a house to go knock on, wherever that is in the world or country. However, there are hundreds of electronic service providers, and what that is, that's your Facebook, your Snapchat, your MySpace, however old you are. It really goes to that platform's participation within the identification of child pornography that are shared across their platform. Now, that platform itself might have different beliefs this way or the other. However, none of these platforms want child pornography shared across their platforms. They do not want that. They don't want people harassed. They don't want people to hurt themselves. They don't want that harm that it comes to a child, and they just don't want that. So they happily share that information with the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, and through a lot of technology that shall not be named, it ends up getting funneled to someone, an investigator like myself, and then we hit the ground running with search warrants and subpoenas. I myself and many other members of the Illinois State Police also fortunate enough to receive equipment from the Attorney General's office where we are taking in child pornography that is being shared on the internet. Obviously, they don't realize they're sharing it with a Illinois State police officer, but they are nonetheless. And those individuals sooner or later end up with a knock on their door with somebody like me as well.
Alicia, you probably, in addition to speaking to kids and in addition to parents, I'm sure you're talking to law enforcement. You're obviously a zealous advocate for law enforcement having the resources we need to be able to confront this issue from an aggressive enforcement perspective. What advice do you give them about how to deal with a child that has found themselves to be victimized by this type of exploitation?
I do speak to law enforcement quite frequently, and that is a big part of my presentation, is how to work with a victim after a traumatic experience. And one of the biggest pieces of advice is to get to the victim's level, to be where they're at. It can be incredibly difficult because now they are taken out of the situation. They may not even understand why it's wrong if they're very young. They may have grown up with this sort of abuse. There's so many different scenarios that each child is different. And so when you're working with the child, to realize that you're going into an interview and it's just like any other interview, it's the same setup. You set up the camera, you set up this, you set up that. To the child, they have every sort of emotion. And they may be quiet, they may be angry, they may be sad, they may be stilted, they may be completely in shock. So to be there with them, I recently spoke, I live in North Carolina now, and I spoke with an agent here, and I just love this story. He is actually a Power Ranger opera singer, and he is an ICAC officer. And if you ever have an opportunity to meet him, he is a phenomenal human being. But he went into a home where a child was being sexually exploited by her mother. And it was such an awful case. And the little girl was shut down when they tried to speak to her. But he noticed that she was a Pokemon fan. So he went in and he sang her the Pokemon theme song. And it opened her up, and she wanted to be this character. And they talked about that for a little bit. And it took her out of the traumatic situation in that time. So I think that's a great example of being in the room with that victim/survivor and being in their energy and just really trying to understand. But also, kids make really big mistakes. One of my favorite bits of feedback after a presentation is, I never thought about it that way. Thank you. And I really appreciated this comment. So I show this video of a young girl, and it's a body cam footage. She met a man online. She was groomed. She was 13. He was 23, I believe, and she stuck out of school to meet him. She made a lot of really big mistakes. She was groomed, and that's why I said we have to understand that grooming makes kids do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. But she went to meet him, and she disappeared. I showed this body cam footage of the law enforcement officer trying to find her, and one of the officers came up to me afterwards, and he said, I would see you as a victim, but I wouldn't necessarily see her as a victim because she made these choices. She did this. And that's the thing. Maybe this child has run away before. Maybe they have sent images before. Maybe you've done knock and talks on that house before. Maybe this goes deeper. You have to understand that children are victims no matter what, and they deserve that help. So please always do that, because in certainly cases of sextortion, these children made a choice to send this image, and they're so afraid. They're so afraid they're going to get in trouble legally. They're so afraid they're going to get in trouble with their parents. They're embarrassed. They're ashamed. They made a mistake. And there's then the cases where the kids continuously do it, and they're more of a victim of society, but always that they are victims. Always be there on their level and be there to support them, and know that whatever that hell may be, they are going through hell while you're doing your job.
Obviously, it's so important for law enforcement to hear that perspective about what they can do to get on the level of a child or teen that's been victimized. But I think it's also important, Acting Master Sergeant, if you would, what is it that is helpful to hear from the child or from the victim? What do we need as law enforcement to be able to put these cases together? I know it's tough. You don't want to re-victimize or re-traumatize someone who's gone through something difficult. But the reality is we need evidence We need to be able to put our case together. If a child or a parent is out there listening to this and they're in that situation, they may need to know, what is it that we at the Illinois State Police or other law enforcement need to be able to bring these perpetrators to justice?
From a strictly law enforcement side, it starts with the evidence of the crime. It starts with the phone, the video, the account, the electronic service provider. But sure, that's good. That makes our case. And that puts bad guys in jail or prison for a really long time. However, it doesn't do much for the victim other than for the win. Sure, I get that. I get the win in the column of bad guy in jail, but I still have my victim. And so many victims are re-victimized. One of the hardest parts for me to wrap my head around when I first started this was why it was so hard telling a 13-year-old, hey, I'm sorry you can't have Instagram for a little bit. Hey, I'm sorry you can't have Facebook. Hey, I'm sorry you can't be on social media. Because that was the outlet that allowed them to feel what they weren't feeling already. It's the realization that something needs to change, good, bad, whatever, in their household to identify that. It's the recommendation of therapy, but not just any therapist, to help them find the therapist that's right for them, the identification of the resources that both NECMEC and the Attorney General has to offer our victims. And it's not dropping the ball. It's not just saying, hey, I got John Smith in Florida arrested for this next. It's them understanding that that picture's out there. It doesn't define them. It may come back a few times. To know to come straight forward with it. To know that even if it's out there, it doesn't define them. To help them through this by any means necessary, whatever we can do so it stops. Every person that we can help with this can educate somebody else their own age. It doesn't have to be a cautionary tale. It can be just a tale told amongst friends to help them not go through this again. It can happen when they're adult again. Sextortion doesn't have to be a child. It can be any age. So it's gaining a victim that's knowledgeable, that's powerful, that's able to get through this and see to the other side.
What does the profile of the predator look like? I mean, is it easy to just paint with a broad brush what the predator may seem like, or is it really difficult to define? What in your experience are we seeing today as sort of the typical profile of a predator that's involved in this type of criminal activity?
There is no typical profile. Over the last 7 years, I've been involved with arresting law enforcement officers for possession and dissemination of child pornography. I've arrested doctors that spent 30, 40 years practicing medicine. Just as early as last week, I've arrested a pastor for allegedly disseminating and possession of child pornography. It's across the board. It's not the basement dweller, it's the professional. And that's why so many law enforcement officers see the validity in these investigations. It's not somebody you can just walk down the street and say, oh, that's a pedophile. We're bringing into light people that have spent maybe their entire life spending in secret darkness with an obsession that nobody else knew about. And that's why so many investigators see the validity in this.
Alicia, you're in this world and extremely knowledgeable about this field. Is that your impression as well, that it's really impossible to say, walking down the street, looking in people's faces, who might be the next predator and who might not be?
It's very true that a predator can be anybody, and something I really want to point out, and I want parents to hear, and anybody else who's here listening to this, is that predators are also of any age. We tend to tell children that it could be the creepy old man, and what we're seeing now is that children are victimizing each other. I speak with so many kids that the predator is in the room. So I recently had a young girl come up to me after my presentation, and she said, Alicia, it was really hard for me to sit here and hear this. And I said, why? And she said, well, my perpetrator's in this room. And I said, oh. And she said, yeah, he's right over there. And she pointed to a young male student. And she said, yes, he's actually laughing and joking and sending images of me right now while we're having this presentation. So parents, please talk to your children about this, because one thing that I will actually go into, and it's a tricky, very sensitive conversation to have, but I will tell kids that, yes, they themselves are the predators if they share images of each other. So when it comes to cases of sexting, I say you get an image of a classmate on your device and you share it. Why do you do that? Because it'll make somebody laugh, because you're part of the crowd, because you're getting some sort of gratification from it. And what that is predator behavior. Predators do what they do. Sadists do what they do without going into sadism with them because they want to hurt other people. And lining them up with, then, yes, you are on the same spectrum of the person who did this to me. And you can be a predator. And I have them all raise their hand and absolutely agree to that. And it's really important for people to realize that, because we paint the predator as an adult, and sometimes they are. But what we're seeing in schools right now, and what we're seeing with cases of sexting and sextortion, and when it comes to artificial intelligence and abuse with that, it is a lot of times minors as well abusing their classmates. And I tell them that you do not have to physically rape somebody to violate them sexually.
Chris Feller from the Attorney General's office, same perspective. It's really difficult to say that there's a specific profile of anybody who might be a predator.
Sure, I would agree with the profile that's been described. The only difference that I would see right now is we're seeing a trend in online financial sextortion. And with the online financial sextortion, typically teenage males are targeted. And we have individuals in the Ivory Coast and other areas overseas. That is their job. It is their job to pose online as an attractive female, to grab the attention of our teenage males and seek not only imagery, sometimes they'll seek imagery, but then eventually they start to demand money from our children. So again, outside of that, the profile that's been mentioned today represents what we're seeing across cases.
Chris, what other resources might be available to help kids and teens, or really to help the families that are parenting kids and teens operate safely around the internet?
With parents, we'd strongly encourage to develop a technology or internet usage plan. The Attorney General's website, onlinesafe.onlinesmart.com, has a template, or you could visit the American Academy of Pediatricians for their digital media family plan. And the purpose behind both is to establish healthy media habits that align with family values. Nationally, you can visit the ICACtaskforce.org site, where our internet safety resources are publicly facing. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has been mentioned multiple times today. Cybertipline.com, you can visit there to make a report. Netsmarts.org, also on their site, is their educational site with videos and resources, talking points to enable and empower parents and teachers and caregivers to have these conversations. They also have a tool called Take It Down. That is a service that helps remove partially nude or sexually explicit photos and videos that were taken when you were a minor. So again, a great tool for youth. I'd also mention Common Sense Media for parents who are trying to navigate which apps, which games should my children be using. You can go to that site and find a review of the different apps. And finally, just visiting the family sites and the safety sites within any of the social media apps that you're considering for your children. And I think one of the main things too, once we decide on that social media app, is just knowing who your children are communicating with. Is it the same individual that you're hanging out after school with, that you're friends with online? And starting those groups small, again, with people that you know, not people that we know of.
Alicia, any other resources that you can recommend for children or teens or families, not just to help protect themselves from being a victim, but also how to recover when they are? We want to save everyone. We want to protect everyone. We want to make sure the things that happen to you don't happen to any person ever again. But we know that even with a fully funded and complete 100% law enforcement effort, that there's still going to be some very dangerous and evil people out there that are going to try to exploit children. So what can people do, any of the resources to protect themselves? But if they are a victim, how can they recover from it?
Recovery can be a long path. There are certainly still days that I have that are shrouded in darkness and struggling through terrible memories. And it takes time. And that's a big part of it, is to realize that you have suffered something traumatic and horrible, and not to compare it with other situations, to say, okay, well, this person went through this, or I read this on the news, I shouldn't be feeling this way, that it's okay to feel pain. And then I know somebody earlier had mentioned child advocacy centers. Child advocacy centers are incredible resources. I did not get to go to one when this happened to me. And so I had to go to a hospital for an examination. I had to go to different law enforcement to tell my story over and over and over and over again. And child advocacy centers have everything all in one place. So the child typically only has to tell that story one time, which is a wonderful gift when you are made to talk about something that you don't want to talk about. And truly, it feels that way at the time. It's really a difficult thing to talk about. Then, of course, seeking counseling and therapy and to advocate for yourself. When I talk to kids, I always say that because you may sit down with the therapist and you go, ooh, this person doesn't fit right with me. And that's okay. You're not going to hurt their feelings. That you need to advocate for yourself and find that person that fits with your needs and your comfort level and your personality and how you want to do therapy. That is what they are there for. You're not just assigned somebody, that you have the ability to pick and choose. To take time, I really feel that it's a lot of small victories, that bravery and courage can be just getting up and getting yourself a cup of tea or taking a shower, or these little bits of moments that you claim your life back. After a traumatic experience, really, I think any traumatic experience, your life becomes a series of timestamps and firsts. And it's the first time that I was home alone. It was the first time I drove through a toll booth. It was the first time I went into a basement. It was the first time this. It was the first time that. And to realize that it's okay to be triggered. I was talking to my boyfriend about this the other day. We were watching a movie. It was called Here. And at one point in the movie, it is 2003 and they are celebrating the new year. It's not that I had a flashback, but I had a twinge. And I was like, ooh, I wonder how I felt the year before. This was nearly the end of my life. And I was talking to him about it. And I said, I think that's such a big part of healing is that when those don't give you a flashback necessarily, but there's still a twinge. You still realize and you still remember, and that slight pain is still there, but it slowly becomes less and less and less. And a big part of that is through therapy, through having strong support systems. It breaks my heart to know that so many children are rescued from a terrible situation or pulled from it in whatever way, and then they are returned or involved in a situation at home which isn't supporting and loving. Children need those resources and that support, that guidance, that love, that hope, and that commitment to move forward. Sometimes it's 100 steps forward and then 99 steps back, and that is okay as long as you're moving forward every single day.
Well, there's very few human beings, thank goodness, but certainly too many human beings that have gone through the type of dark experience that you have. And as you said, Alicia, you have those dark days where you were reliving, even in small ways, what it was like to be treated less than a human being. That's what so much crime, so much evil in the world really comes down to, seeing a human being as less than a human being and treating them so horribly. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your story with us today. I think our focus really in this podcast that we've partnered with Bill Curtis on is from a law enforcement perspective. You've said a lot today that certainly gives law enforcement, the men and women who serve in the Illinois State Police and other law enforcement agencies, more than sufficient motivation to keep fighting this fight as hard as we can every day. Any other final words of wisdom you want to share with the Illinois State Police special agent that's out working those cases today, the prosecutor that's struggling with a pile of cases that's on their desk, the cop on the street that is just trying to navigate one little daily crisis after another, but that needs to make sure they don't miss this type of threat that's out there as well? Anything you want to share with them?
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do. This is arguably the hardest work, to see the worst of society, the worst of abuse. And often it's not a crime scene, but it's something that's happening currently, that you're witnessing the crime and that you can't look away from it, that it's not just words in a report that you're writing, but there's so much visual and auditory horrible experience for you. So thank you, but also please take care of your mental health. It's really difficult, I know, for law enforcement sometimes to put down that shield and that guard, and just know that you have to take care of yourself. But also, in order to do the work that you do, you have to make sure that you are in the strongest, best, at least relatively best state of mind so that you can continue to do this work. So please take those mental health breaks and make sure that you look at the world and remember how beautiful it is. I spoke at a law enforcement conference recently. We discussed extensively mental health and went over what law enforcement experiences and the jadedness and the world is full of bad people and all of these experiences. And what I've learned is, yes, the world is full of bad people. There are so many bad people out there, but there's so much more good. And good has to be louder. Bad is loud. Bad doesn't have any boundaries. Bad just runs for it, while good tends to be quiet. Good tends to take little steps. And we have to be louder. We have to speak up. We have to fight so much harder. Good has to be louder to win. And thank you so much for being part of that good every single day. I know every case isn't a win, and that pile just keeps growing of cyber tips every single day on your desk and on your files. But every life that you impact is a life saved. So thank you so much for all that you do and continue to do. I appreciate every single one of you.
We talked about a lot of amazing resources here today and some incredible tools that law enforcement has at their disposal. But the most important tool that they have is it's not their badge, it's not their gun, it's not their digital technology, as amazing as it is to investigate these cases. The most important tool they have is their heart and their mind and their soul. That's the thing that is most important to helping them solve these cases, to be able to have empathy, to be able to connect with a victim who we need to help, to have good judgment, to know what's a threat and what's not, and to be able to protect public safety and pursue justice and fight crime and fight this type of terrible evil in the world. So I appreciate that, but also know that people can, as you are proving here by how you are carrying yourself, you can go through absolute hell and still be happy and still be healthy, because what you went through matters. And certainly what you went through, Alicia, it matters, and it still matters, and it is making a difference. And the difficult things that law enforcement and prosecutors and advocates go through, that matters too. I think you just said it so beautifully. Good has to be louder. And if there's nothing else we can take away from this conversation, it is that good has to be louder.
We close the file on this podcast with the message to parents. Now you know what's happening. It's up to you to be aware and to make your children aware. Educate them before they get on a device. As always, law enforcement will be there to answer your questions and help. Remember, good has to be louder. I'm Bill Curtis with the files of the Illinois State Police. Our thanks to State Police Director Brendan Kelly and Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul. This episode of the Illinois State Police Files was edited by Sam Rusink and produced by Trooper Tammy Wellborn. For more information, visit the website of aliciakozak.com and consult her book, The Internet Safety Guidebook, Protecting Kids in the Digital Age. Thanks for listening. I'm Bill Curtis.